Excellent. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2024 Big TADA. This is a super exciting moment. My students in Stitching Towards Discovery have been working hard, diligently, tenaciously for 6 months. And this presentation is, in many ways, their graduation ceremony. It is an opportunity for friends and family and admirers and all of us to really gather and see the work that they've made. So I'm going to start the presentation, and I have a few things to say at the beginning, and I'll just let that presentation be the cues on those things. First of all, we have to watch the little slideshow that I love, that really just, is sparkly, and that's kind of how the Big TADA is. So this is the third one, 2024. We've had graduates in 22 and 23. And I don't know, it's just such a special moment for all of us. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. Elizabeth is our moderator, and some of you may have heard her speaking a little bit before we started the program. And she tries to keep everyone muted, but in this situation, the people that are talking need to unmute themselves, but everyone else should stay muted. That's really going to allow us to have a really nice recording, which all of you can watch again if you want to on my YouTube channel. And yeah, so it just keeps things nice and quiet. To begin, I'd like to share with you a little bit about what Stitching Towards Discovery is. It is a 6-month-long seminar. It's structured a lot like a class that you might take in an MFA program. We meet twice a month, and during those 2 sessions, they're each 3 hours long, we have guest speakers. We have what I call a Stitcher Salon, where we talk about things that are relevant to us as quilt makers. Every month, the students get prompts, and by prompts, I mean suggestions for things that they might explore in their quilts. And through all of this, there's a Facebook group. We had accountability partners this year where you paired with another person for support. There's opportunities for feedback and consultation. And the goal is really to create a small body of work, which would be 4 to 6 large wall quilts. And during that process, all of us are working to create a sustainable practice, a way that we can dedicate time to our work and grow as artists and support each other in that growth. It is, I don't know, it's just such an incredible event, and it's such a great way to connect with other people who also want to grow as artists. And all of the 6 months worth of work is accumulating in this moment now, where 20 of the 25 students are sharing their work. And what we're going to do is it's going to be in alphabetical order for the most part. And each student will share who they are, where they're from. And you'll also notice that if they have any social media they'd like to share, that will be next in the lower right-hand corner of all the images. And then I'm going to advance the slides as they talk about their work. Each presentation will be about 3 to 5 minutes long. There won't be any questions or comments happening verbally, but I do encourage you to put comments in the chat and show these quilt makers how great you think they are. And the last thing I'd like to say before we get going is that these portfolios are really a testament to what can happen if you dedicate yourself to being a quilt maker. All of these quilts are original, authentic quilt compositions that they have created, not using patterns or other people's instructions. They have developed these entirely from their hearts and minds, and it's, I just love it. Okay, and one little quote, as I often do with my workshops. This one's from Calvin Coolidge. Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. And I always show this slide because this is kind of what it feels like when you cross this finish line. All right, we're going to start with Patricia.
Hello, my name is Patricia Ambergy, and I live in State College, Pennsylvania. I had three main goals in Stitching Towards Discovery. One was to use patterning and abstraction with recognizable subject matter. Another was to develop color palettes that reinforce the meanings of my quilts. A third was to create quilts that address women's issues. My first project in Stitching Towards Discovery was this set of quilts. The theme and color palette come from this year's Cherrywood Challenge. The theme for 2024 was poppies, and the palette was 4 reds, 2 grays, and 2 greens. For my next project, I selected both the theme and the palette. This quilt was inspired by the movie Barbie. Toward the end of the movie, the doll Barbie becomes human, and in the final scene, she arrives at her first appointment with a gynecologist. This made me wonder, what would the reproductive system of a doll turned human look like? This quilt is not a critique of the doll or the movie. It is a playful, irreverent portrait of a cultural icon. My next quilt is a critique. This quilt is a parody of Ingra's Violin, a photograph created by Man Ray in 1924. The title of the photograph refers to a 19th century painter, Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, who played a violin when he wasn't painting. At the time Ray created this photograph, Ingres' violin had become a common phrase that meant a hobby or something a person does for fun as opposed to one's professional work. The model in the photograph was Alice Prin, also known as Kiki. The photograph objectifies her in multiple ways, through Ray's placing f-stops on an image of her back to suggest her body is similar to the shape of a violin, through the Orientalist turban she is wearing, which at the time signified an exotic sexually available woman, and through the title Ray gave the photograph, suggesting that Kiki was his hobby, or perhaps more broadly, that women in general were hobbies for men. My quilt disrupts the objectification of Kiki and or women in general by omitting the f-stops in turban and covering the woman's body with abstract patterns. In my quilt, a viewer is no longer invited to gaze at a sensual, sexually available woman. In my quilt, the woman is no man's hobby. My next quilt concerns the mud flap girl. This image has been around since the 1970s. We see her not only on mud flaps, but also on t-shirts, coffee mugs, hats, bumper stickers, lapel pins, golf balls, cookie cutters, you name it. The image is so ubiquitous, it almost seems normal, almost. But it isn't a normal representation of a woman. It's an obnoxious, sexist stereotype. In my quilt, the mud flap girl has escaped from the sexist stereotype and is walking away. This last slide concerns my plans for future work. I plan to continue making quilts about women's issues, and I plan to use a palette that features pink. The small quilt on the left is not a composition in its own right. It is a record of some of the colors and patterns I've used so far in my quilts. It consists of leftovers from previous projects, patterns I tried out but did not include in a composition, and other ideas. Why pink? Pink can be a gendered stereotypical color. Think of women and girls in pink frilly clothing that conveys sugar and spice and everything nice. But pink can also be a color of resistance and strength. Think, for example, of the pink pussy hats of the Women's March on Washington in 2017. Or consider this photograph of Cyndi Lauper, shown on the right, that recently appeared in my Facebook feed. Pink can be a color that signifies the power of women. That's why I'll be using a palette of pinks in my next quilts. Thank you for watching my presentation. I also want to thank Maria, Elizabeth, and the community of quilters in Stitching Towards Discovery. The last 6 months have been truly awesome.
Sorry, I'm going the wrong way.
Okay. Hi, my name is Cindy Bartle and I live in Aurora, Ontario, which is just north of Toronto in Canada. I've been a quilter for over 30 years, but I discovered a whole new world when I met Maria Schell in improv quilting in 2022. This is my second year embracing Maria's Stitching to Discovery. Last year was the beginning of my journey to become an art quilter. With monthly prompts, guest lecturers, and regular accountability, I began to find my artistic voice. A prompt of the simple art of noticing produced these two works from last year. Turtles, a painted turtle and a blending turtle, a challenge of both improv and precision piecing. We were challenged to explore the design concept of working in a series. So this year I expanded my world of turtles. This turtle was sparked by stories of my nephew swimming with sea turtles in Hawaii. I tried really, really hard to initially work with a more subdued color palette, hoping to reflect the challenge of turtles worldwide, but I just couldn't do it. I need color. I'm very pleased with the final color palette and had Maria's tiny voice echoing in my head. When in doubt, add brown and more neutrals. Moving in a completely different direction, this piece was constructed in response to the prompt of line. This, I discovered, was a challenge. I am drawn to lyrical prompts, and responding to a design-only prompt took me in a new direction. No preconceived sketching or pattern. I just started slashing and sewing, a skill I found difficult. Turns out I like control. The borders came together after several months of various additions on my design wall. The title, Dancing Dendrites, was definitely the physiological process as well as the design itself. This Jack in the Pulpit was triggered by Maria's big botany class, a real love-hate work to construct. The class instruction was to design on only 2 dimensions. I couldn't do it. Turns out I not only like color, but movement and perspective. I auditioned and struggled with multiple backgrounds, trying to find something to balance the strong patterning and colors of the plant. I'm pleased with the final choice of the muted improv log cabin blocks. I'm glad I didn't give up. This piece reminds me of a very special aunt who always took us looking for wildflowers. Loving the improv log cabins of my previous work, I knew I wanted to explore it further with some more color. Initially, I was going to piece more objects into this work, but as I progressed, the color alone spoke to me. For me, it was strong enough. I have added the abstracted quilting components of a sailboat, and this has become my memorial quote from my dad, "Red sky at night, sailor's delight." Starting to realize that I have a voice worth listening to, I stretched it further with this bluebird sky. After a visit to British Columbia's snowy mountains in February, this was made in response to the prompt of place. One of Canada's group of 7 artists, Lauren Harris, and his wonderful use of light was also an inspiration. Once again, this was a puzzle to piece, and I'm proud I problem solved my way through some complex construction challenges. I can see my future with a few more pieces done in this style. In the future, I would like my designs to become more spontaneous and intuitive. I think I'm finally at the point where I can call myself an artist and maybe be a little bit braver in sharing my work. So thank you, Maria. And thank you to all the folks that have supported me along this journey.
I'm Kate Brown. I've been quilting regularly since 2017 when my family moved to Cleveland, Ohio. The two things are connected. One of the things that draws me to quilting is the sheer pleasure of working with color during Cleveland's long gray winters. In 2022, I discovered Maria's work, and I've been studying with her ever since. 3 of the quilts I made this term are medallions, each responding to a different place. Here, the place is Jerusalem, a name whose Hebrew root is shalom, or peace. The quilt is a personal response to the devastating war between Israel and Hamas. Its title comes from Psalm 137, in which Judean captives grieve their exile from Jerusalem. The color palette is inspired by the Dome of the Rock, one of the oldest and most sacred sites in Islam. I really wanted this quilt to be beautiful, and it went through many redesigns toward that end. For me, it's a call to remember that the city we yearn for is not just a place, but also an ideal of justice and inclusivity, a city of peace. This quilt pays tribute to a very different city, one not usually heralded, Cleveland, Ohio, where I live. The design was inspired by the arc lamp, the first viable form of outdoor electric lighting, which was invented by a Clevelander. In 1879, Cleveland's public square became the first outdoor space in America to be illuminated with electric rather than gas lighting, whereupon Cleveland was designated, probably quite briefly, the City of Light. My goal with this design was to use the interactions of shapes and colors to capture the vibrational quality of electricity as it emanates outward from the central figure, which is an abstract version of an arc lamp. I began this project in a class taught by Maria with Cindy Grisdella and Sarah Bond at the Madeline Island School of Arts last fall. I really liked the pieces I made, but I couldn't settle on a design until I had edited them all back out again. That's when I was able to achieve a mood that suited my idea. The quilt honors my large extended family and the lake house where we've gathered for some 50 years now. The design comprises many, many individual pieces and units, but they compose themselves into a harmonious, sunny whole. Of course, my family is not always harmonious and sunny, but it is an aspiration that unites us. This is my second Cleveland quilt. It began with the units eliminated from the previous composition. Then, with advice from classmates, I added yellow and blue pathways to connect what would otherwise have been self-enclosed blocks. These pathways remind me of the canals and rail lines that once connected Ohio's ports to its manufacturing plants. The piece is named Whiskey Island, a peninsula where the Cuyahoga River meets the Great Lakes. Whiskey Island came to house a distillery, a shipping and railway yards, salt mines, steel mills, a cholera hospital, and slums. In short, all the hard realities of a manufacturing city. This final piece might not look as big as it is. It's actually quite large, nearly 10 feet wide and 5 feet tall. It began as an exercise in neutrals and just kept growing as I tried to figure out what it was about. Eventually, I decided that the neutral pieces formed the wings of a moth, and that's when I added the blue lettering on the body and the base of the wings. The base combines quotations from William Shakespeare and Virginia Woolf. It reads, "And I hail a tiny bead of pure life dancing." The center reads, "Emerge." Stitching toward discovery is all about daring to emerge, which doesn't really come naturally to me. So I wanted to end by thanking all the participants in this class for the warmth of their company and the inspiration of their example. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, my name is Katie Deemer, and I live in San Jose, California. In September 2023, I attended the workshop Piecing Perspectives, taught by Maria Schell, Cindy Grisdella, and Sarah Bond at the Madeline Island School of the Arts. At the time I attended the workshop, I had quilted for approximately 20 years, but never showed my quilts to anyone other than a few close friends, never put them in a show, never even held them up at a show and tell. Quilting was and is my meditation. If asked what my style was, I would have said, "What? I don't think I have a style." I had never heard of improv quilting, but knew Sarah Bond and heard wonderful things about Maria and Cindy. The Madeline Island School of the Arts class focused on making a variety of pieced improv units, then putting them together. My first quilt, titled Mind Map Northwoods Edition, is the result of that class at the Madeline Island School of the Arts. After that, I signed up for Stitching Towards Discovery with hopes it would assist me in finding my quilting voice. My second quilt, Bugs Make Beauty, was a challenge to myself to make a figurative quilt using improv techniques. In creating the main flower, I limited my fabrics to those involved in food or food production, i.e. bugs and food-themed fabrics. Part of the fun of this quilt is looking for the watermelon or the flies, etc. I used the braided river technique to create a lush, leafy background for the flower, challenging myself to use green prints to get a monochromatic background with enough variation to give depth and movement. Some of the flower petals are three-dimensional and will eventually have little bug beads sewn on or under to enhance the 3D effect. My third quilt was a response to the neutral prompt. I think you can tell by now that I like color and am a maximalist. I did the neutral challenge because it seemed really hard and likely to expand my quilting and art knowledge. When I played with the neutrals, I realized that the key for me is contrast. I set myself boundaries to have areas of high contrast for approximately 1/3 of the quilt, areas of low contrast for 2/3 of the quilt. The high contrast units look like buildings to me, and riverscape happened. The water used the braided river technique. The sky was a combination of braided river technique and a randomization of small pieces technique I worked out to give enough depth and movement to make the neutrals look like skies or wall. When it is quilted, I will add in a braided quilt stitch to act as the chain across the bollards at the top of the wall, traditional for the European cities where I grew up. The next quilt, Blue Leaf Group, is the fourth quilt. It is a response to both a prompt, monochrome, and Maria's Zoom class on making pods that I realized that I really needed after I made Bugs Make Beauty. This quilt is 78 inches wide and 37 inches tall. I made many pod units and then rearranged them. Upon putting them together, I decided that this quilt should have as few straight lines as possible and used the improv curve techniques to join the pieces. With those two rules, only fabrics from my blue collection and only curve piecing techniques, this quilt presented enormous technical challenges. I'm no longer scared of curve piecing after doing this one. My fifth quilt is Chaos Theory. This quilt was my return to my true quilting love, color. It was also a response to the pick an artist prompt. I couldn't pick just one. I picked Juan Moreau and Vasily Kandinsky. My thought process for this quilt was to limit my palette, leave plenty of negative space, and have the main unit structures involve shapes with curves, while including Irene Roderick-style skinny curved lines, which Irene discussed in her lecture in our class. Again, I made units, which I then rearranged along different themes, eventually ending with putting the pieces together, focusing on circular movement in the piece. Next up for me is entering some of my pieces in quilt shows. I have a small piece at the Pacific International Quilt Festival coming up next month, and have challenged myself to enter at least 3 quilt shows by the end of this calendar year. I will also be teaching a hand dyeing class soon, something I've never done before, and a class on how to use those hand dyed fabrics in your quilts, all with the goal of being more comfortable talking about my quilts and recognizing them as art as I continue on the journey of finding my voice. Thanks to everyone in the class, particularly Maria and my accountability buddy, Wendy. It's been a joy and a challenge. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Stephanie Jorgensen, and I live in Boston, Massachusetts. A new quilter, relatively new. It'll be about my 3rd year now, and I really have no sewing background. I consider myself an adventurous beginner and was really drawn in by improv style, and kind of got going by taking some of the online classes or the virtual classes with Maria Schell. So that gave me the courage to dive into this intensive workshop, even though I might have been in over my head, considering my skills and background. But my journey here really is about learning. I would like to develop a voice. I don't think I'm there yet, but I had great fun along the way. And really a big goal here was to explore what it would be like to kind of have a regular practice and try to commit time regularly to quilting, and also really to invest in the process of trying to design unique quilts. The first piece here was done before the workshop started, but it is the first quilt I kind of made on my own. Clearly, a ruler was used. I was not fully immersed in improv, but there was no pattern. I was on my own. And I used throughout this piece, except for the white, upcycled textiles, mostly cotton men shirts. And you'll see that that's kind of a theme throughout the rest of the pieces that I did in the workshop. But, I see that as a choice, and it was an exploration, not particularly a commitment to recycling or dogma. I certainly have a huge stash of commercial fabrics as well, but I was interested to see if these materials would limit me or in any way or not. And what I think I learned is they provide their own challenges because they're not all the consistent weight and structure and texture. And also there's quite an investment in preparing these materials, washing, trimming, cutting, things like that. This is the first quilt that was really produced in the meat of the workshops, and it's wholly made of corduroys, a variety of weights and um, textures. And I was exploring kind of color gradients. There you can see maybe the cranberry going from darker to light, and then the opposite direction on a diagonal grayscale. When it was finished, I was a little disappointed that it wasn't more vibrant, and so hence I added the bright yellow banding through the middle rows, and that really made me happy. This was a learning exercise in all these different textures, and all the pieces are cut on the bias. So that was plenty of a learning experience for myself. And one big tip I took away from this was the walking foot was a big friend in piecing corduroy. This next piece continued my exploration of corduroy and more adventurous color, diving into pairing of dynamic colors and using a shape that I'm drawn to, the lava lamp. The detail isn't very clear from the picture, but the grain of the corduroy is different in the 2 different shapes. The smaller ones horizontally, and the larger ones have the grain going all along the outside edge. I really do enjoy working with this material, and I look forward to quilting this one. I really love the feel of the corduroy once it's done and made. This quilt came as part of working on in a workshop led by Sherry Lynn Wood, and it is an homage, I suppose, to an African-American quilter, R.B. Williams. That was the theme of the workshop. She's known for what was called the breeches quilt. And she pieced whole construction pieces of jeans into, basically really stunning modern designs. And, really, really admirable and beautiful pieces, and, impressive that such works of art were coming out of basically working with humble materials and for, practical everyday use. They were bed coverings. But I also use corduroy here. Incidentally, I was drawn to the glowing edges of the areas where the dye was resisted in the seams. This quilt was perhaps my most technically challenging one. The micro piecing or small improv piecing was definitely a learning experience, and it is a representation of a place, Ravine. It is a town in northern Croatia. It's a peninsula, Istrian Peninsula, and it's basically the ancestral home of my maternal grandfather, sorry. And I had the pleasure to go visit there and reconnect with old family a few years ago. My mom, we took a trip there, and it was quite a magical experience. And this was my homage to that place. Again, the materials here are upcycled textiles. This includes quite a variety of khakis, which were very difficult to work with and not quite friendly to ironing, as well as silks and men's shirts and things like that. And I definitely look forward to exploring this kind of improv piecing in the future in additional quilts. And then my last quilt really was the first one I finished during the 6 months, but it's kind of still the culmination for me. It's a double duty project, which I think highlights that you can't underestimate the power of a deadline. This was a quilt that the design was conceived and worked on in a workshop with Maria Schell, a medallion style design in her Round and Round workshop. And the double duty was that it was part of the Boston Modern Quilt Guild Denim Challenge, which was a project done in conjunction with the Boston Museum of Science on their ongoing sustainability program this year. And we had a deadline that was mid-May for the quilts to be hung in the Museum of Science during a one-day lecture. So that really really pushed me to work through what was quite a challenge to, really conceive and put together a unique design like this. The top is 50% upcycled denim, and otherwise, similarly to my other pieces, a lot of cotton men's shirts. I do, really enjoyed this workshop and the journey that we went on and working with everyone. I think I did learn from working with all these materials. They're not a limitation. They added their own challenges, but it was very interesting, and there's such a variety of colors and materials and things to be inspired by. So I hope, maybe other people will look at that and take a chance to also incorporate these kinds of materials in their work. And I look forward to continuing to develop my own designs and ideas. Thank you very much to Maria, Elizabeth, and my other fellow quilters.
Hello, my name is Jamie Calvestrand. I live in the southwest corner of Minnesota. I'm an artist, a designer of both textiles and products, and I'm a quilter. I like to say my design work feeds my belly and my artwork feeds my soul. My challenge to myself in this workshop was to see if I could find as much joy and freedom in quilting that I had found in painting and mixed media art. In other words, I wanted to quilt like an artist. This quilt, titled Next Dimension Still Life, is a return to a technique that I use in my art practice, where I add layers to a canvas, turning the canvas, adding layers until I see something like a face, a still life, or a landscape. Sometimes a horse. If not, I sometimes leave it as an abstract, but more often I keep making changes and turning until I do see something. This piece was created in a similar manner. I produced quilt number 2, titled Squared, by choosing from a variety of prompts provided. I picked design, element, shape, and from there I developed this quilt based on a square. I started this quilt by making random units from my fabrics, and this included a fan-shaped unit similar to the flower on the far left side of the quilt. This unit reminded me of a mixed media piece that I'd done with a tulip motif, and that led me to experimenting with piecing more floral motifs, and eventually this quilt, titled Greenhouse, emerged. After that, I looked at other mixed media art that I'd created and used them as a jumping off point for my next 3 quilts. The thread between the art and the quilts is a photograph of a human eye. I titled this one, Surviving Everything. Here, I also started with the eye, built the woman around it, and then reintroduced the floral motifs. While in development, this quilt was referenced a number of times as Mother Nature on social media. I in turn named the quilt Tender and Fierce, just like Mother Nature. Again, I started with the eye and built the quilt around it, not knowing where it would lead. This time, a grand, noble woman made her appearance, and I titled this quilt Ennobled. I have to say, I'm thrilled that I have found the joy I was looking for in this process. I've already received inquiries about teaching a figurative art quilting workshop, and I'm working on putting that together. I'm grateful to Maria for the openness and freedom she allows in this workshop, Elizabeth's support, and all of the wonderful artists that work together on these projects. I'm definitely on a roll and will continue to quilt like an artist.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Kellogg. I live in Richland, Michigan. As a lifelong quilter, I figured out recently I've been quilting for more than 50 years. I've enjoyed transforming fabric into unique pieces of utility and art by stitching together fragments of color and texture. My quilts have typically blended traditional patterns with a modern aesthetic. I strive to create works that celebrate the beauty of life. I took Maria's Stitching Toward Discovery class to challenge myself to create a small series of non-traditional quilts focused on a single theme. I also wanted to test out using different materials other than cotton. I chose the almond shape as my theme, and I used it in 4 different ways, as you'll see in the following slides. Almond silk is a blend of a traditional overall design that's made of intricately pieced almonds using silk fabrics. The almonds are set into a linen background. I really like the contrast between the curves and the softness of the earthy colors and the structured mosaic-like look of the patchwork almonds. You may notice that some of the circles that are formed by the 4 almonds are missing half of an almond. I plan to hand embroider those areas to add a crazy quilt element to the finished piece. Almond Seeds is an abstract design of muted and earthy colored cottons, silks, and linen. I really hope that the rhythmic pattern across the quilt will create a calm and cohesive visual effect to everyone who sees it. All the pieces were cut with a rotary cutter, but not a ruler. That was fun, to say the least. After this class, I plan to add some additional piecing around the edges to create a quilt that's large enough to snuggle up with during the cold Michigan winters. Slivered almonds marked the end of my use of earthy colors in this class. I wanted these bright slivers to have the feeling of waves or vines or rolling hills, but with a clean, modern aesthetic. Once I quilt this, it will be sent to a friend in Cincinnati who wants to use it as a bed scarf. Flowering almonds. Well, most of the fabrics in this quilt may be recognizable to you as being from Kay Facet's collection. I don't think there's a single color missing from this quilt. The curves were cut without a template, hence the slight variance in size and shape of each unit. I have to say the striped borders were my favorite part to make, as they used lots of little bits that were laying around my cutting table. It was my hope to create a piece that's visually stimulating, and I do think I succeeded with that. This quilt is also going to be used to keep me warm in the winter and remind me that spring will always come. The next few months will find me quilting these 4 tops and then starting on a couple of ideas that came to me while working in the class. Thank you to Maria and the fellow artists for all your encouragement and especially your inspiration.
Hi, I'm Roberta Lagomarsini, and I'm an art quilter from Bishop, California. I took this class to learn more about myself as an artist. I'm inspired by and primarily create works of the Great Basin Desert, which is California, parts of Oregon, Utah, parts of Colorado, and parts of Arizona. I currently work in several series. One is land, one is prayer, one is water, and one is baskets. And I took this class to learn more about myself as an artist. What I learned is that my existing artwork is good. This is a quilt that was made way before this class, but it's a depiction of a swamp in a pond in the Great Basin. This is a tiny quilt I made that was improvisational. It was an auction quilt, and I took this class because I admire the kind of piecing that Maria does, and this is an attempt at that a couple of years before this class. This quilt is in response to the neutral prompt. If you ever see my entire portfolio, you know I never work in neutrals. So I learned from this class that I can still make a vibrant quilt out of neutrals. And this is an ode to one of the internees at the Manzanar internment camp, which is located about 45 minutes south of my home. This quilt, although had been started before the class, I finished it in this class, and it's in response to the block print Brauhaus prompt. I learned in this class that I like to take things and cut them up so you can see the detail. And the point of this quilt is to study the shapes of the leaves in detail. I learned in this class that I could work in solids. I don't usually work in solids. And This is the snow stakes in summer. In California, the snow stakes are bright orange, which is really quite an ugly contrast to the environment. And usually they're left up all year because it can snow in July and August. But this is inspired by the fence, the line, and the same shape prompts, as well as the color studies of Joseph Albers. I learned in this class that I like to play. We were given a prompt of scale. And so this is a small gift basket, which is a kind of basket that's usually only 1 or 2 inches big, made by the local Paiutes in the Great Basin. And they're given to people who are very special. And so this is a 12 by 12 quilt. So it's small for me, and it is a gift basket. And then this is another quilt I made before this class. And this is my blue basket quilt. And what I learned is I do want to work more in my basket series. And I've started that a little bit, but I need to do more on that. I learned a lot about working in series and how important it is to furthering your quilting expertise and design expertise. So I intend to work on that more down the road.
Roberta, that's your last slide.
Oh, well, let me finish then. Okay, so I also learned that I was very excited by all these prompts. I was very excited to work with people who make quilts that are very different than mine. And I found that very invigorating, although I'm probably never going to do all the piecing that the rest of you do. That is so gorgeous. Um, and I learned that hard work and putting yourself out there works, because on a week ago, I was notified by our local art gallery that they're going to give me a solo quilt show, which I'm very excited about. So enter shows, put your work out there so people can see what great quilters you are. I want to thank all the participants and Elizabeth and Maria for educating and inspiring me. I learned many lessons from this journey. Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Joni Morgan, and I'm from Danville, Kentucky. It's about the center of Kentucky in the state. I've been quilting for about 20 years, and I took Maria's class to get inspired to get going again. I felt like I was in a lull and just hadn't done a lot, and wanted to start quilting again in a big way. And I thought 4 to 6 quilts in 6 months, that's a lot, and I was up for the challenge. And so I jumped in with everyone else. The first quilt I did, I titled Tile and Grout, and this was inspired by Sean Scully, who is, it was a prompt, and he is an Irish artist that often got his inspiration from the tiles and textiles of Morocco. So it was, I used all woven fabrics, or also known as cross weaves. They're also known as peppered cottons or shot cottons. But I wanted to try quilting with these types of fabrics, and I also wanted to try and make the blocks look like grout. And I went ahead and finished quilting this quilt because I felt like the quilting was important to the whole piece. And in each block, I used a different quilting pattern to make it complete. The next thing I tried was Maria's technique on cutting without a ruler. So the center of this medallion all of those strips are cut without a ruler. And at first it was a bit of a challenge, and I kind of got used to it after a while. And then once I had these 16 blocks completed, I decided to turn it on its head and make it a medallion quilt, and added what I call flying geese around the edges. This quilt is called Free Range Flying Geese, and all of the flying geese were some fabric that I had been hoarding, that were hand dyed fabrics that I had made in a workshop. So I thought it was time to get those out and give them a try and put them in a quilt. The next quilt is Tropical Dance Floor, and there are two curves in this quilt that were the fabrics that were left over from the previous quilt. I just felt like I wanted to use up all of those fabrics since they were hand dyed. I added some more of the hand dyed fabric in there. I added some of the cross weaves as well. And when I stepped back and kind of turned this piece from one side to the other, I decided it kind of looked like maybe a dance floor from above. People standing on the edges, people dancing in the middle. So I named it Tropical Dance Floor, especially with some of the bright green colors in there. And this was a quilt that I called Stranger Things. It's a night scene. It is full of wonky stars, something I just really enjoy doing. The background, a lot of the navy fabrics actually have little stars in them. And I decided to add some comets. I added some northern lights. And in the very end, I decided to add a spaceship. So the spaceship has a light beaming down on the house below. And I'm really looking forward to quilting this quilt. So it kind of makes me happy, and of all the quilts, I felt like this was more my voice than anything. So, and what's up next for me is I have 3 quilts to quilt. I quilt my own quilts on my domestic sewing machine. So I'll be busy this fall quilting those quilts. And then there was a prompt that I really was taken by, and I think I'll probably work on that prompt. And it was the American artist Stuart Davis. And Stuart Davis was an abstract artist born in 1892 and died in 1964. He also, some of his work were even on U.S. postal stamps. So he was a very modernist painter. So I'm looking forward to maybe trying that on my own and seeing what I can come up with, and being inspired by some of his work. And I want to thank Maria for all her encouragement. And I want to thank Kate Brown, who was my accountability partner. She gave me some courage when I needed it. So it's been a great class. I've really enjoyed hearing all of the speakers, and Maria's constant just encouragement, and it's been something that I've really enjoyed.
Hi, I'm Marion Murdoch, and I live in Mapleton, Utah, which is the small town south of Salt Lake at the base of the Wasatch Mountains. I took Stitching Discovery as I wanted to refocus, to learn and develop better time management habits, and to push myself to expand my quilt making. This class has exceeded all those expectations. Desert Vibrations. I have always liked improv quilts because of the energy they have. but I have not done much of it until this class. The class prompt I used for this piece was neutral, repeating one block. I pushed the neutral palette and did not use a ruler. It was very hard for me to cut off those points, but I'm happy with the results. Fancy shawl dancers. I used Maria's prompt using one shape in different sizes and the 12 color palette. These are all oak shot cottons. Again, I did not use a ruler. I added the black skinny lines to emphasize the triangles and give it more movement. I plan to quilt it in circles to represent the movement of the dancers. Chain reaction. This piece was the result of the Bauhaus prompt. This was not my most successful quilt, but Maria gave us some really great advice to give ourselves a time limit of how long we would mess with the piece and then sew it up and move on. I plan to practice my free motion quilting different motifs in all the open spaces this has. Santa Fe. The inspiration for this quilt came from a trip to Santa Fe and all the beautiful pottery I saw while I was there. When I was piecing it, it didn't have much life, and even thought about not finishing it. My classmates suggested that I add more color to it. I knew I didn't want to change the color palette that I had. My inspiration was the pottery. Then I remembered that when I was pulling my original palette, that I had considered doing it darker. I decided to use the darker values in the corners and the center and use more rust in those blacks and then add a touch of turquoise. As the result, it was much more interesting. Whichever way the wind blows. This quilt was made in Maria's kitchen sink class, using blocks and pieces left over from other work. I was shocked that I had all those flying geese. I guess I do like that color palette. Prickly pear. For this piece, I created some of my favorite units, then put them on the design wall and moved them around until I had them the way I wanted. Then the fun began, as I had not used a ruler to make the units. It was a real challenge to piece the odd shapes together. But like Maria says, it was a real skill builder. Going forward, I plan to create every day, sewing or sketching, and continue to push myself to grow as an artist. I want to thank you, Maria, Elizabeth, and my fellow classmates. It's been a fun adventure, and I'm so glad I got to do it with all of you.
Hello, I'm Laura, and I'm coming to you tonight just outside of Minneapolis. I started quilting about 8 years ago. I'm very drawn to improv. I've dabbled in a lot of different quilting types, but the improv is kind of where my heart goes. This workshop came at a time when I really wanted to figure out where my quilting practice was heading. So it was just great timing, and I appreciate this cohort of artists and quilters and friends and all of the lecturers and Maria and Elizabeth. So this is called Sean, and like Joni, I looked to Sean Scully. He was one of the early prompts, and he had he has a large painting called Shutter that I admired. And I liked the palette because it reminded me of my good sized collection of cherry wood fabrics. So I explored stripes and just had some fun with that. And I left some big open spaces because I love the cherry wood so much. My friend Lisa Puklich, who I've been working with, collaborating with, quilted this for me. I enjoy, right now, I'm not quilting my own pieces, and I kind of like that because I like to get another set of eyes on my work. So it's just fun to see where she takes things. This, I don't have a picture of it quilted. It was just hung in the Minnesota Quilt Show. This started as a night of just therapeutic sewing after my best friend from college died. And I just, sometimes, you know, you just need to sew stuff together. So the medallion shape kind of came out of that evening. And then as I built the rings around it, I just tried not to overthink every minute, which you'd think as an improv person you wouldn't, but I do. Maria has a good phrase that has stuck with me, both in front of and away from the sewing machine, which is that the first good answer is the answer. It's easy for a lot of us to say, oh, but what if I can find a better one? And you probably always can, but if you found a good one, I'm going to just try to go with that one. So thank you, Maria, for that. Also, like Patricia, I participated in the Cherrywood Poppy Challenge. So that's where this palette comes from. My entry, I tried really hard to make it something that was going to get accepted, and surprise, it didn't. But I had all these leftover pieces and bits, and I decided to just see what I could make with them without trying to get accepted into a challenge. And that was important for me to do and to learn and to remember that I kind of have to be myself, stay true to my creative self. This is one based on, Maria gave us a prompt of Helen Frankenthaler, which most people probably think of her big, colorful color wash paintings, but she also did some abstract sculptures with found metal, and I was intrigued by the photographs of those. I started this as a really big organic thing, and it was too much of a stretch for me because though an improv person, I do have some control issues. So it got sliced and diced and arranged in a way where I felt like it was bending to my will. But I want to revisit that and see what I can do. And Lisa, my friend Lisa, also quilted this, and I love what she saw in it and what she did, and I don't know that I would have seen or done the same things. Okay, and then I have my last one for this seminar. This was from the Ordinary Object prompt, and I enjoyed working on this because I sort of hit a stride where I sketched out components, elements, and then I let myself freestyle what was going to be in them. Instead of just making tons of bits and trying to make them work together, or drafting a pattern and executing it, which I get bored in the middle of. So I'm excited about maybe having found a direction that sort of feeds my improv side and my control side. So I'm hoping to continue exploring working that way, and in the future to just developing a practice that might culminate in me being able to refer to myself as an artist without having an attack of imposter syndrome. I'm a retired graphic designer, so that's a very assignment-based life and not necessarily an inner creative life. But I appreciate y'all listening to me and looking at my work, and it was so much fun. Thanks again, everyone.
Am I unmuted, Maria?
Yes, you are. And since you're talking to me, I think I may have gotten a few of the titles turned around. I tried to get them right.
Okay. Well, as long as we have the right pictures, I'll be okay. Shall I start over? Or did you hear my intro? You heard my intro?
No, we didn't hear anything, Sherry. So you're on now.
Okay. All right. My name is Sherry Priest, and I currently reside in Barberton, Ohio. I have been quilting for a little over 20 years. My goal in taking this class was to become a better quilter and to occupy myself during the long, dreary Ohio winter. I also wanted to try working in a series. We received our first set of prompts in December prior to the start of the class. One of those prompts was monochromatic. I had previously made a few pinwheel blocks in the riffing on tradition style, distorting traditional blocks in a new way. I added gold, giving me a pushed monochromatic palette, made some more pinwheel blocks, and pushing it was the result. During the Stitching Toward Discovery class, I took Maria's kitchen sink quilting class. I had 8 orphan blocks from a Karen B. Stone paper pieced quilt I started in 2002. It was supposed to be a queen-size quilt, but that didn't happen. Let's just say that paper piecing was not my thing. I added in 8 improv pieced blocks using techniques I have learned from Maria, and this happy little quilt is the result. I named it Stone Meets Shell. Single card key punch is this next quilt. It has many inspirations. I used the Sean Scully prompt to select the colors in this quilt. The Stuart Davis prompt inspired the pieced numbers. My biggest inspiration, however, is my father, Robert Louis Feiger, who was working in data processing in the 1940s when I was a baby. This is a representation of a single card manual IBM key punch machine that he owned. The numbers were distorted and worn off some of the keys. His name is written in EBCDIC code in the card to the left. The sidebar shows some of the intricate quilting done by John Chaparas of Flourish Quilting. Counting on it. The key punch quilt began my series of vintage computing devices. Other than our fingers and toes, one of the earliest computing devices was the abacus. Counting on it is a representation of a 5-bead Japanese abacus called a soroban. The bead position represents the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was created in response to the shape prompt. Before silicon chips were invented, computers used magnetic cores to store information. Wires were strung through the center of each core to magnetize the core and to read data from the core. Created in response to the line prompt, this quilt, called core memory, not single core memory, is entirely improv pieced without a pattern. It was the most difficult thing I have ever pieced. The sidebar shows some of the more intricate piecing. My final quilt, which is not yet quilted, is a continuation of my Vintage Computing Devices series. In response to the scale prompt, I enlarged a single magnetic core. Each core is capable of storing either a 0 or 1, thus the name of this quilt, which is 0 or 1. In closing, I'd like to thank my friends, Maria Riedel and Margaret O'Reilly, for giving me the courage to sign up for this class. Maria Schell, Elizabeth Berger, and the other members of my class have been a great source of encouragement throughout the class. I accomplished my goal of working in a series. I think I've become a little bit better quilter along the way, and plan to continue working on my Vintage Computing Devices series. This year, I actually enjoyed the long Ohio winter.
Hello, I'm Anne Richardson. I'm from Canberra, Australian Capital Territory, Australia. I joined this class because I felt I'd been making quilts, but they were just quilts. I wasn't unhappy with them, but I wasn't happy with them. I felt that they could have been quilts made by anyone, and I wanted to work in a series. My first quilt, called Strip Sets, was made in a Nancy Crow class. And Nancy Crow classes have bookended the stitching towards discovery for me. We made strips according to formulas and then had to join them together. While I was not unhappy with this quilt, I just felt it was strips cut up. So when I got home, I made Bush Shack. And basically, I started with the neutrals prompt, but added lots of browns and a bit of red. I was much happier with how the strips came together in this quilt than I was with the previous quilt. So back to Nancy Crow class. This was the second quilt made in that class. We took our strip sets and then we had to create a composition. So I made the swoopy type shape and put this quilt together. This quilt was a lot of fun to make, but being a 60-inch long quilt, I ended up having to make a lot of more strip quilts to get the length I needed to do this quilt. I then took the idea of those shapes and thought what would happen when the strips were put together, but also trying to maintain if I'd made a strip set that was curvy. So, and again, I went back to that neutral palette that I'd used in the second quilt to make this quilt. This one was actually quite frustrating to make. It came on and off the design wall, and other things went up as I tried to get it to not look too busy. But finally, I was happy with the quilt. Carbocarda came from the prompt place, but also the butterfly wings were taken from the negative space made in the prior quilts. So the place is the tropical rainforest in North Queensland, and there's a point where the road rises above the rainforest canopy. So you actually look down on these majestic Ulysses butterflies, which are quite large, floating above the tropical rainforest canopy. I've been wanting to make a quilt with that memory for ages, and I have finally achieved that. So transitions. This is my final quilt, and this was made in my second Nancy Crow class. This was totally different. There were no strip piecing. This class was based on taking shapes and playing with shapes and putting shapes together, stretching shapes, shrinking shapes, having fun with shape. I really love this process. So while I have 2 more strip piece quilts in the works that I want to finish, I feel that this process made in this last quilt is where I wish to go. My husband and I do a lot of travel. I take a lot of photos when we travel, and a lot of them focus on shapes and are not typical tourist photos. And I can see the potential finally for turning my photos into quilts that don't just look like a photograph of where I've been. I've really enjoyed this class. It pushed me to keep creating, even when I should have been outside gardening in our summer. I'm disappointed I didn't get my quilts quilted because I love the quilting process, but I would have had to have retired to have achieved quilting as well as making. But it does show if you really commit, you can get a lot of work done. I enjoyed the class. I love the fact that people were prepared to be honest when you asked for advice and not just say, oh, yes, that's lovely. To me, that has been one of the best parts of this class. I'd like to thank Maria and Elizabeth for all their support, and particularly my buddy, Martine. Having a buddy, someone you could bounce ideas off, was really a wonderful idea. So I think that's a great part of the class. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly Roberts. I'm a full-time potter and quilt artist from the Bahamas and reside on the beautiful island of Abaco. My journey into the world of quilting began at a young age. I started with traditional patterns and soon immersed myself into the world of quilt design. Over the past 15 years, it's been my passion to design my own quilts, infusing each piece with the essence of the Bahamas. My quilts are exclusively made with my hand-dyed and printed fabrics. Every stitch, every color, and every pattern in my quilts tells a story of the beauty and vibrancy of where I live. This class has gotten me back into a regular routine of creating with fabric and the discipline that comes with creating a series. This quilt is Independence Junkanoo. As we approach the 51st Independence celebration of the Bahamas on July 10th, this quilt symbolizes a tribute to the spirit of my homeland. In honor of the jubilant Junkanoo celebrations, which are the cornerstone of Bahamian culture and heritage, this quilt embodies the zest for life that defines each and every Bahamian. As I pieced this quilt together, I was inspired by the colors of the Bahamian flag, the aquamarine of our blue seas, the golden hues of our sandy beaches and sun, as well as the black, which symbolizes the strength and resilience of our people. I tried to capture the energy and exuberance of a Junkanoo parade, where music and dance intertwine to create a spectacle of joy and unity. This quilt celebrates milestones, struggles, and triumph that have shaped the Bahamas over 51 years. She's So Big Eye. This quilt started with a central medallion. When I first stepped back from my design wall, all I could see was a face with one big eye, a striking image that resonated with me and inspired the direction of this quilt. In Bahamian dialect, the phrase, she's so big eye, holds a unique significance. The quote symbolizes boldness and boastfulness. I hope this quilt carries the message of boldness and creativity and celebration of the Bahamian spirit. Abaco Regatta. The Abaco Regatta, held every summer from the 4th of July till the 10th of July, is a tradition that marks the transition from American independence to Bahamian independence. The event brings together locals and visitors alike in a colorful celebration that showcases the best of Abaco's maritime heritage and community spirit. Participants in the regatta engage in friendly competition, racing their sailboats across the crystal clear waters in pursuit of not just prizes, but more importantly, the coveted bragging rights that come with victory. I drew inspiration from the events, the atmosphere, and the seafaring heritage, starting with a series of triangles in my favorite colors. I sought to capture the essence of the sea, its boundless beauty and tranquil depths that have long inspired sailors and artists alike. As the quilt took shape, I placed the blocks in a slightly wavy pattern reminiscent of the gentle breeze and slight ripple of the water on a perfect sailing day. I aimed to evoke a sense of movement, freedom, and joy that characterized the sailing experience on the Abaco Islands, where every race is a dance with the wind and the waves. Welcome to the neighborhood. As I started to design this quilt, I began with black and white half square triangles, which are more of a traditional block. As I arranged these triangles on my design wall, to me, they resembled the steep angles and peaks of house roofs, invoking a sense of home and shelter. I decided to further enhance the neighborhood theme by introducing thin and thick lines to represent the roads that connect us within our community. The pathways of these lines meander around the quilt, mirroring the networks of relationships and connections that define the fabric of a neighborhood. May welcome to the neighborhood inspire us all to cherish our roots and walk hand in hand towards a brighter, more connected future. Mix up like conch salad. At the heart of Bahamian culinary experience lies the beloved conch, a large sea snail that serves as a culinary delight for many Bahamians and visitors alike. The conch can be prepared in various ways, but perhaps best known and loved in its raw form as a part of the iconic conch salad. The fresh conch is combined with chopped vegetables, a generous splash of lime, and a kick of pepper, creating a zesty and refreshing dish that captures the essence of the sea and the sun. The title of this quilt, Mix Up Like Conch Salad, is a Bahamian saying that conveys a sense of being mixed up and unable to get things together. Many times in the last 6 months, I've felt exactly like this. While creating this quilt, I embraced the notion of a jumble of elements coming together in harmonious chaos, much like a chaotic mix of ingredients in a bowl of conch salad that somehow meld together to create a delectable dish. This quilt is a mix of random squares, each telling its own story. Like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled, I arranged the squares, making them fit together like intricate flavors of the well-prepared conch. It is also a celebration of the beauty found in chaos, the magic that emerges when different elements come together to form a captivating whole, while also finding unity in the midst of confusion. I'm immensely grateful for the opportunity to share my quilts with you all today. May they bring you the warmth, the joy, and a glimpse of the beauty that surrounds us in the Bahamas. A huge thank you to Maria, Elizabeth, and fellow participants for your support and advice over the last 6 months. It's hard to believe that the 6-month journey of stitching towards discovery has come to an end, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the journey. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Christy Stevenson, and I'm coming to you from Yardley, Pennsylvania. I've been a traditional quilter for a very long time, and I'm relatively new to improv. Last fall, a dear friend suggested that I watch TADA from 2023, and I signed up for Stitching Through Discovery the very next day. This piece, City Lights, was actually made with strips from a Nancy Crow class in a class with Irene Roderick. And both teachers suggested to me that a way to develop my own voice, my artistic voice, would be to work through a series. And my goal in taking this class with Maria was twofold. One, to work in a series for the first time in my life, and also to experiment with different processes, different work processes. At the beginning of January, Maria had a class called Half Circles and Lines. I took that class, and this piece I put together with all of the half circles were made in Maria's class, and I put it together with a number of orphan blocks that I had. Meraki, you see down on the left, Meraki. It's the name of the series. It was a Greek word. I saw it in a restaurant on a wall. To do something with soul, creativity, or love, and to leave something of yourself in the work. And I think you find something of yourself in work as well. And this piece, I started out working in black and white. I ended up adding just a little bit of red to it. And the process that I used, I set the major black lines up on the design wall, and then I created the smaller components. I wanted a lot of negative space. I like quilting my own quilts, and I tried a number of different quilting patterns in this piece. Meraki number 2, I moved obviously to color, used a few of the half circles, and I really changed my process with this one. I started by making components and found that I absolutely loved making the components. Could have probably have continued that forever. I wanted the components to have different scales, and I'm pleased with how that turned out. And then I put it on the design wall and added the linear elements at the last, at the end. This last one is Meraki number 3. And I used a wider range of values and the grayscale, as well as some flat and glowing colors. My creative process had to change pretty significantly with this one. I had an unexpected hip replacement. And with that, I couldn't sit at the sewing machine for almost a month. So I designed this quilt in Procreate and colored it in. And then when I was able to stand at the cutting station, I cut larger pieces of fabric in the colors that I wanted and laid them up on the design wall. It was a very different way to work for me. And what I learned in creating this piece is that I want to do more in Procreate. I found that to be a very valuable way of working. I've used Procreate to decide on my quilting designs for a long time, or to make changes with something that's up on the design wall and just paint it in Procreate. But I think I'll begin designing in Procreate going forward. Where I want to go from here, I want to continue with the Meraki series. I also want to take Big Botany with Maria in the summer. And I have to say that this class really set the bar much higher in terms of classes that I take. Maria's comments were invaluable. The guest presenters that we had were outstanding. And I loved the formal and informal ways that the other participants in this seminar worked together. So thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Maria.
Hi, my name is Patty Vallis, and I live in Venice, Florida. I began quilting in the late 1990s, but life got busy and I had to put it on hold. However, a few years ago, I pulled up my stash and I rediscovered my love for quilting, and I made my first improv quilt, and here it is. I've named it Wildflowers and opted for hand quilting using the big stitch quilting method, a technique I hadn't tried before. Despite its slightly wonky appearance, I instantly fell in love with the quilt and felt compelled to explore this direction further. That's when I discovered Maria and her YouTube videos. Intrigued by her style and technique, I invested in her improv patchwork book and started participating in her virtual workshops, and thus my journey began. My next quilt is called Kaleidoscope. It was inspired by one of the quilts featured in her book. While I completed the top quilt late last year, I wasn't able to quilt it until after I began the Stitching Towards Discovery workshop. Creating this quilt posed several challenges. It marked my first quilt using only solid fabrics. Harmonizing the palette was tricky, but the most challenging aspect was getting it squared. After numerous adjustments and the addition of the centerpiece, I eventually managed to achieve the desired square shape. This quilt has undoubtedly provided me with invaluable learning opportunities. My next quilt is called Plenty of Time. For this piece, I embraced the prompt design element, which challenged me to select a shape, vary its size, and ensure it all fit together without utilizing any other shape or ruler. I opted for the hourglass block and incorporated printed fabric in the design. While it awaits quilting, I'm delighted with how it turned out. Introducing the Key of E, my latest quilt creation. A distinctive feature of my quilting style is incorporation of black and white fabrics, lending a striking aesthetic to each piece. However, this quilt marks the first time I exclusively utilized monochromatic tones. Struggling to find the perfect name, I turned to Instagram for inspiration. A suggestion from one of my followers resonated with me, and the key of V was born. Compared to my other quilts, creating this one took no time and just fell together perfectly. And finally, presenting my happy place, which is my ultimate creation and personal favorite. Inspired by the prompt, if I were a quilt, what would I look like? This quilt embodies the essence of joy and vibrancy that resonates with me deeply. As you can see, I have a preference for incorporating a myriad of bright colors into my quilts. By using the 12 color palette theory and learning about color value, this quilt becomes a delightful visual pleasure that never fails to bring a smile to my face. In reflection, participating in this workshop has been an extremely rewarding experience for me. The knowledge and skills I've gained are truly invaluable. I would like to thank Maria, Elizabeth, all the students, and a special shout out to my buddy, Susan. Over the past 6 months, I've undergone significant growth, and I'm filled with excitement about the future directions my quilting endeavors may take me. Who knows, perhaps one day you'll spot one of my quilts gracing the halls of QuiltCon. Thanks.
Okay, hello. My name is Martine Van Pay, and I live in East Hampton, Massachusetts. 2 years ago, I left my work and returned to quilting. I hadn't been a big quilter, but I had done a lot of art stuff. I discovered Maria Schell online and fell in love with her quilts. I signed up for Stitching Towards Discovery, hoping to find a group where I would learn and be accountable for sewing 6 quilts. I didn't realize that the class expectations would be also for creating original works and becoming an artist. Throughout the 6 months, I heard Maria's voice in my head saying 6 phrases as I pushed through construction disasters and design headache. 1, start from one corner and move from there. 2, follow your heart. 3, you have to put the work in. 4, only use units you love. 5, we make art because we have to. And if you see a mistake, fix it. Each quilt, unknown to me, offered me a new lesson. So, a visit to Frida's house, my first prompt quilt. Maria offered prompts for each month, often suggesting an artist. I chose Frida Kahlo as I had just been on a trip to Mexico City in March when the jacaranda trees were in bloom. Her house is preserved as a museum. The entire house had so many inspirational images to choose from. Putting it all together was my first design challenge, but I started at one corner and worked my way to the other. Dancing with the Nines, my love of Amish 9 patches. I love Amish quilts with 9 patches. This was my first attempt to integrate 9 patches in a design with other elements and colors, an exercise in following my heart. Lost in Curves, Braving the Curve. I decided I was ready to learn a new skill besides straight lines and the grid. I took Maria's circle and curve sampler class and dug in. This quilt is the culmination of my practicing making curves and circles. What to do with all the arcs? This evolved along the chain with the chain piece that was also made in the workshop. This quilt taught me to keep at it, and it gets better as you put in the work. Loop-de-loop, learning from critique and not letting scraps go to waste. I was shocked and bothered with all the scraps, half circles left behind when working with circles and curves. I decided to go back to the circle project using the scraps and applying the critique Maria offered in response to the Lost in Curves quilt. I played with the negative spaces around the domes, and I played with creating new shapes when putting units together. And I made sure I loved every unit as I decided on the final quilt design. Quilter's Keyboard. back to lines and exploring units inspired by Maria's improv book. I wanted to return to my original desire to become Maria and to master some of her improv techniques. So I set out to make units I loved inspired by Maria's book. I had great fun making the crosses, the tracks, the stars. My big obstacle was putting them together. I still love all the pieces, and they are the foundation of my original attraction to Maria's work and the experience of making art because I have to. Renaissance. Oh, those are upside down, but that's okay. Return to an image from over 40 years ago. So it's up, anyway, 40 years ago-ish, I was between graduating from college and a social work career. I made these watercolors of eggs cracking out of a deep crevice. I had no idea what they meant. Making them was the first time I entered the creative zone, though, with no control or intention, just creating, and I loved it. So 40 years later, I decided to make a quilt from an original image of mine. This quilt taught me to persist, and if you see a mistake, fix it. I thought I had mastered curves, but you can turn the, yeah. Each seam may have been sewn and redone more than 3 times, but it is now mostly flat and the design is balanced. I learned that quilts have their own life as they evolve. And although the image started with a past image, it and I have had a rebirth in returning to the soul-soothing zone of creating. This class was a great experience, and I enjoyed every aspect of it. While making the last quilt, I said, I'm taking a break from the art drill and grill, returning to the known. However, I've already ordered more fabrics and signed up for a new class with Maria, and I've old and new projects in mind because I have to. This other element of this class that was so amazing was, as you've seen, people are from all over the world. And this was such an experience to have a connection to other quilters who are all over. And I want to thank Maria and Elizabeth, and especially Anne, who was my accountability in Australia. Couldn't believe it. It was really exciting. So thank you, everyone. And that's it.
Hi, I'm Wendy White, and I live in Oak Park, right outside of Chicago. And while I'm a lifelong sewer, I have no formal artistic training, and I'm new to improvisational quilting. I signed up for Stitching Towards Discovery to learn more and to stretch my creative boundaries. And I really wanted to focus on how to abstract things. So in the past 6 months, I've been traveling quite a bit, actually, for the last year. And for the following series of quilts, and while I was taking this class, you'll see that I wanted to take sort of my experience there and abstract those different environments, including some of the prompts, the line work, and carefully chosen color palettes. So this quilt portrays Napa's winter hues with dormant vineyards and fields blanketed in mustard grass, and the sharp contrast to the bright orange signs against the dark earth rose and a vivid blue sky. And those I wanted to juxtapose with the lush green fields. So hopefully that kind of captures the essence of the season. So I developed this quilt after a trip to Iceland to see the Northern Lights. And I worked to capture that sort of dance of lights across the dark sky with the straight lines blended with the curved quilting. And that's because when I made this quilt, I didn't actually know how to do curves. So I did the straight lines and then I did the curved quilting to help echo that play of colors. And then as part of this process, I took Maria's Circle and Curves class. And here you can see this quilt uses a sort of a strategic placement of contrasting elements within a pushed purple color palette. It was a response partly also for the prompt of a neutral palette. And you can see that it was really all about the curves and a kind of a log cabin, but with curves. The idea was to highlight the interplay between light and shadow that show up at the end of the day, wherever I am. And I worked with those curved pieces so that the pattern could be used in various ways. And hoping that the juxtaposition of the varied textures and tones within this single color scheme add depth and complexity. So that made me think about, after a trip to Hawaii, that I wanted to sort of look at that same kind of pattern, but do it in an angled way and with the idea that of a much more vivid hue to express sort of Hawaii's joyful landscapes in this quilt. So I use sort of a similar pattern, but everything is straight instead of curved in this case, all these different angles. And then that one got cut off a little bit. I did a second quilt based off my trip to Hawaii for the night. So that was sort of the day, and this was kind of the night. I broadened the angles and added in some white and black patterning, and thinking about how to put all those things together. And then my final quilt for this class was based on a wonderful textile trip I took with Maria in April to Morocco. Which I know some of you had heard about. So this was it. So I used a color palette, cherry wood, which people have also mentioned, and with lines and dots to show the patterns of Morocco that I was seeing everywhere, and thinking about sketching. This quilt kind of circles back to my very first quilt, the Napa in Winter, and that it's less about pattern and more about shape placement to evoke a place and a feeling. So I'm moving forward with my quilting journey through this class and excited to continue to challenge myself to look carefully, to sketch, to think about lines and pattern and color, and create quilts that evoke feelings and places. And I want to thank Maria and Elizabeth, and of course, my accountability partner, Katie. I've just learned so much, and I can't wait to continue and quilt all these this summer and fall. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jane Beatty. I live in Brentwood, California, near San Francisco. I've been quilting for over 30 years, and for the last 5, I've been working to build confidence as an art quilter by growing my skills in construction and design. I took this workshop last year and made great progress, so I signed up again to continue my artistic growth. Besides, Maria's workshops are a lot of fun. Next. This quilt, I've changed its name to Pueblo Vistas. I've experimented with a much more muted palette than I usually use. I abandoned the ruler and was playing with inserting lines between unstructured shapes. It's inspired by some broken glass tiles, and I think these blocks resemble the views of a Pueblo village seen through fractured window panes. Next. I call this quilt Biennale. It was inspired by a Sean Scully art installation I saw in Venice. The different blocks echo elements from his artwork, and the final composition resembles Venice's jumbled streets with colorful surprises waiting around every corner. It's easy to get lost, but you always find something beautiful to look at while you're there. Next. I call this quilt Roundabout or Circus Rings. I'm kind of bouncing back and forth on the name. I made it in Maria's Round and Round workshop. The palette was determined by leftover striped bits from the Biennale quilt that I had just finished. The bright colors and pop art shapes remind me of the circuses my dad used to take me to every summer for my birthday. This quilt I call Happy Go Lucky. I made it in a Cindy Grisdella workshop. The colored stripes continue from the previous 2 quilts, but the overall palette is tempered by the cream background. I think it evokes compasses, navigation, and the joy of discovering new places. I call this quilt Mazatlan. I'm still using bright colors. Can you tell I was craving a lot of sunshine this spring? I made a dozen striped sets using Southwestern colors and set them off with a range of grays. I laid these over a color block background of primary colors a la Annie Albers. It feels like a beach blanket on a bright summer day. I spent a fun day making these 2 colored striped blocks in a terrafawn color workshop. So I call the quilt Travel Journal because I challenged myself to find a unique and meaningful artistic composition for the blocks. I used a page from a travel journal as my layout inspiration. The excited words are separated by circles as punctuation. Some words run vertically along the margins, the way I add in extra notes into my journal entries later on. This quilt is called Indigo Hills. Over several months during lockdown, I dyed dozens of indigo fabrics using shibori techniques. Since then, I have been waiting for just the right project to use them on, but the big idea never came. I've had the fabrics displayed in a basket on my sewing table for the last year, hoping they would prick my subconscious and something would come to me. I finally decided to just start playing with simple triangle blocks so inspiration could find me working. I added in a few silks for contrast and to support the Japanese theme. However, the composition didn't sing for me until I added in the orange horizontal lines. Inspiration finally arrived. It was nice to finish the workshop up with a personal victory. The one change that I've noticed in my quilting this year is that I've become much fussier about little details. Just because something is completely pieced does not mean that it's finished and I cannot make any changes. If something still bothers me after a day, I change it. I leave things hanging on the design wall until I feel like everything is humming along together. I'm going to continue along this path, finding inspiration in the art and places I encounter. This workshop's been transformational for me. Thank you, Maria and Elizabeth, and all the other students. It's been wonderful looking at your work and listening to the problems you've encountered and how you've overcome them.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susan Skadoff, and I'm a very new quilter in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. This class challenged me to create freely from within, a skill I had not tackled before. I should warn you that I've been quilting for a little over a year and can count the number of finishes on one hand, and my improv count is even lower, near to 0. So these 6 months really stretched my mind in ways I'm not normally comfortable with, and I'm so happy I took the chance. The format of this class, the lectures, the speakers, the collaborative Zooms where we watched each other wrestle with decisions have been eye-opening and inspiring. And I thank Maria, Elizabeth, and all of my classmates for this experience. And with that, here are my first 4 improv quilts. The monthly prompts encouraged me to find inspiration all around, which I did at the Boston MFA during a college tour with my daughter. There is Mondrian's famous composition with blue, yellow, and red. It is shockingly small at 16 by 20 inches. Why were these things appealing, these lines and colors on a small canvas? When asked why he preferred to work on a structural grid, the artist replied, "Because curves are so emotional." I just loved that sentence. Using that as an inspiration, I made my own Mondrian and then took a deep breath in my rotary blade and reworked its regimented form. Curves are really emotional. Inspiration doesn't always come from fine art. Here it found me at a Tampa Marriott elevator. I loved the play of light on the paneled walls and the idea of a hotel elevator taking visitors up and down over and over again. Guests in the hotel are on vacations, traveling for work, sporting events, weddings, funerals, concerts, and more. How many laughs and how many tears and what kind of arguments and first kisses and more had happened in this tiny box? My life, like everyone's, is in transition. I'm going up, I'm going down. I'm trying to remember to enjoy the beauty in everything around me and see if I can ignite a creative spark as I get ready to turn 50. Place has a new definition for me as my children head off to university. No longer is the home the center, especially when your eldest chooses to go to school in Scotland. I took this photo on the beach at midnight in December when we first arrived. It was spectacularly cold and strangely luminous. I wondered if I could capture the eerie beauty in fabric using tiny squares and sweeping curves. Trying to capture the mood, the creepy gloom, and the movement of the moment was exhilarating. As I mentioned at the beginning, this class challenged me to find the creativity and voice within. This was my first and final piece during the past 6 months. It was the idea that came on day 1. It is not inspired by famous art, ordinary elevators, or stunning landscapes. It's just me. It has many starts and stops. It has been worked on, ignored, given up on, and brought back, reinvented again and again. This quilt speaks to who I am today, a study in low volume, a person in the background working on discovering who else I can be in the next 50 years. The quilt features a log cabin with a traditional red center representing the heart of the home. Here it is splintered, dispersing as my children grow up and leave the home. Who am I next as the rooms in my house empty? An artist, a creator, maybe. The answer isn't clear, but I'm so glad I didn't quit and I can't wait to keep going. And sorry, Maria, but you have me for Promptomia this summer. Again, I want to thank Maria for her dedication to each of us, and especially Patty Vallis for being my steadfast rock in this process. I'm not sure if I'm an appropriate grand finale, but I'm certainly proud of my big ta-da. So yes, I am here, and I hope you hear me, and that we can all relate with each other. Thank you so much, and congratulations to all of you.
Wow. I am just blown away. I mean, it's so good to see all of your work and hear your words that go with the work. And yeah, it's really amazing. I did have some more slides that I was going to share with you, but I already left the slideshow. I'm just going to say them. Stitching Towards Discovery is a commitment. It's a real journey. And Elizabeth and I have been talking about a way that we could offer a workshop that was more fun. Not that Stitching Towards Discovery isn't fun, but a workshop where it's a little less pressure to complete 4 to 6 quilts. So we're offering a workshop called Promptopia, and that will start in July. It is a similar format in that we meet twice a month for 6 months. And I'm using the word prompt or Promptopia but in reality, it's a quilt design exercise. So every month you'll get one quilt design exercise. There will be a guest artist who is also going to be doing the quilt design exercise with you. And they will present their work along with their process, photos, images. So you get to see what an artist does in between when they get an idea and then when they finish their quilt. And we'll have a stitching salon, and we'll have a private Facebook group. The class is limited to 25 students, which I found to be a really nice number for this type of class. And it's inexpensive this year because it's our trial run. I'm also teaching, which is dirt cheap, $30 for a 4-hour class that I do every year in January and July, called Improv for Everyone, and that'll be coming up in July. You can find out how to sign up for those by visiting my profile page on my Instagram or by going to my website and looking at my teaching schedule. And if you can't find it either of those places, you can email me at mariashell4@gmail.com. And that concludes our ceremony. I do feel like it's a graduation ceremony. And I think that if people want to unmute themselves and give all these amazing artists a hand, I would love that. And yeah, new Stitching Towards Discovery starts next January. So maybe you'll be in the class next year. It's a great experience. All right. I'm going to go to the gallery view. And thank you all. Yes, very. Yay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maria.
Thanks so much.
Everybody. Have a great summer, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.